Okay, so sometimes when you're teaching a lesson, you want to explain something and it doesn't come out the way that you want it to come out. And I felt that that happened today in today's class with the asynchronous counters, whether they were an up counter or a down counter, and the polarity of the wiring. And so this is my attempt to just clear that up and make sure that I explain it better than it went down in class today. So to kind of clear it up, maybe we hope, okay, is to do an up counter. And what's helpful is if the D flip-flops and the JK flip-flops, if we can find one way of describing this that's going to apply to both kinds of flip-flops. So in a D flip-flop, in your clock, like the little icon on the clock is not inverted, okay? Meaning it is a positive trigger. And so we would maybe describe this as the polarity of the clock is positive, because on a D flip-flop, the clock, the flip-flop changes or reads the inputs on the rising edge or the positive edge of the clock input. In a JK flip-flop, when you look at your clock, there's that little inverter, okay? And so we might describe this clock polarity as negative, okay? So you've got the rising edge and the negative edge, and you can tell that by the little circle that like inverts it. So a JK flip-flop reads the inputs on the falling edge of the clock. Now, to count the up counter, so let me go over to the next slide here. So you've got your flip-flops, okay? And honestly, it's not going to matter if it's a D or a JK, all right? Do it like, I'm really bad at this. Okay, so you've got your clock, and we'll just do the D flip-flop first. And that's considered a positive clock input because of the rising edge. If you want this to count up, then you wire it to the opposite polarity on the output. Now, this is like your Q, and this is not Q. So we might think of this as this is the original polarity, this is like the negative or the opposite. I think in math class, one of the ways that we can describe a negative number is opposite of. And so if you want to count up, you would take your clock and you would wire it to the opposite polarity. Now, on your JK flip-flops, you've got your clock and it's inverted, and we think of that as being a negative just because it's on that falling edge. And then you have the flip-flop before with the same deal. You got like a positive and then the opposite. Well, we would wire it to the opposite in order to get the up counter. So in the JK flip-flop, we would take our clock and we would wire it to the positive, and I don't know what happened there, but we'll put that back. Okay, so to have an up counter, up, yay, up, okay? In both cases, you are wiring the clock to the opposite polarity. In a D flip-flop, because it is a rising edge trigger, that means you're going to wire it to not Q. In a JK flip-flop, because it is a falling edge trigger, you're going to wire it to like just Q. Okay, but in both cases, you're connecting it to the opposite polarity. To make a down counter, oh, I didn't change that. Oh, well. Okay, we wire it to the same polarity. So in our D flip-flop, we have our clock, which is rising edge trigger. We have Q and not Q. And so to make it go to the same polarity, we would wire it to Q. In my JK, because it is a falling trigger, so we would consider that negative, then we would wire it to the same polarity. Okay, so that has to do with, it has to do with the rising edge of that clock or falling edge of the clock, and then what we consider positive and negative. And so up counters, you're always going with the opposite polarity. Down counters will always be the same polarity. And that gives us one rule that covers both the D and the JK flip-flops. So I hope that this is clearer than it was in class today. If you still have questions, please let me know. It is always my goal. It's tilted at a weird angle. It's always my goal to explain things as clearly as I can, and I can't do that if my students won't ask questions when there's something I need to go back and revisit. So please let me know if you still have questions, but I hope this at least helped clarify that polarity question for your up and your down counters.